Hi, I'm Sunny Bottoms, and this is Between Two Levies. Today, my guest is Dr. Jason Norsworthy. He's going to have to help me with this, the distinguished professor in Elms
Farming chair
of the University of Arkansas Systems
Division of Agriculture.
There we go. I needed
Mouthful,
some help. That's don't want to get anybody in trouble, but yeah. So you know a little bit about rice weed control, I'd say.
A little bit.
Yeah. How long have you been?
No, I'm involved in rice. I started in rice 1995, I guess, working on a master's degree under Ron Talbert at the time. We both had an opportunity to do some work for Dr. Talbert. And other than 5 or 6 years I spent at Clemson University, I've had my hand in rice.
Great. I know you've known you a long time, so we'll go way back. I think first met you here on this farm because we're recording it not in a rice field today, as you can see, but I came to Fayetteville to catch up with you. So I've got a question. So if you could be any weed, what weed would you be?
Which weed would I be? It'd be one of two, probably barnyard grass or a Palmer amaranth, Palmer pigweed.
I figured the Palmer would have been the. Why would that be?
One of those two, and just because you're able to change, you're able to adapt to anything that's thrown at you, and it's just those weeds have always impressed me. You know, I spend probably 90% of my time working with those weeds, trying to beat those weeds, and I wish I could tell you that I've had some success, but it seems like to me they're always one step ahead.
They are. I think they're smarter than us.
I agree with you.
Makes me question what we're doing here. So we were discussing some topics. So let's start first with the top 3 problematic weeds that you see in Arkansas rice.
You know, when I look at Arkansas rice today, barnyard grass remains the number one weed. It's been there since we've grown rice, and it continues as a result of all the resistance that we have associated with it. And then secondly today would be the sedges, and I just kind of group those in loosely. I'm talking about the annual sedge, and mainly annual sedges, more so than yellow, but the yellow is also problematic. And then from there would also be weedy rice. Weedy rice is something that a lot of our growers, you know, when we're switching over and we're growing Previsia, we're growing Max Ace rice, most of those guys are doing it because they have a weedy rice issue.
So do you see, those are the top 3 weeds today. Have you seen a shift from years past as far as what were the most problematic weeds, say, 10, 15 years ago?
You know, yeah. In 2006, I did a first grower survey here in the state. And, you know, annual sedges didn't even make that list.
Right.
And, you know, you think back at the time, you know, early 2000s, we started using Command. And Command's today, clomazone is on all those acres and really doesn't have any activity on the sedges. And I think that is what has placed a lot of selection pressure on those, or placed a lot of pressure on those weeds, just from the standpoint we needed something else to control them. And they have definitely increased. And so they've gone from not being in the top 20 to one of the top 2-3 weeds we have in the state would be annual sedges.
And we're having different species of those annual sedges. Used to be predominantly rice flat sedge, but now we're seeing other
weeds. And, you know, the white margin sedge is something, you know, we were talking earlier, and I've got a student now that's working on white margin sedge. It says continue to increase. It's spreading across the state. You know, you were telling me earlier you're seeing it even in the southern portion of the state. And it's a weed, I think, at times that we confuse with yellow nut sedge. We confuse it with rice flat sedge out there. And unfortunately, that weed, our go-to herbicides, such as things like Gambit, really hasn't been an effective option for us.
Right. Yeah. Most of those, I just consider when someone's calling me about an annual sedge, it's ALS resistant.
Absolutely.
So we got that pulls all those out off the table.
It's the chances of controlling an annual sedge with an ALS herbicide is extremely very slim.
And so I think we were controlling those with ALSs for some time, and because when did you say the first? For white margin sedge, when was it first
So it was
noted?
I have a student, he's been able to go back and look at herbarium records. In 1938,
that's crazy.
That weed was found in Stuttgart.
Yeah.
And so I'm convinced that we probably have had, at least in some of these rice fields, we've had it. We've been controlling it. But unfortunately today, all the populations, I looked at 35 populations this past year from mainly Arkansas, a few from the Blue Hill of Missouri, and we had no success with the ALS chemistry in controlling that weed.
Yeah.
So it tells me that, yeah, it has probably developed a resistance over time.
So now we talked about the past. So as farming practices change, especially in the rice culture with AWD, which is alternate wetting and drying, to where you're draining the field for part of the year after establishing your permanent flood. It's less water usage, things like that. There's a lot of benefits from that. Row rice as well, where you're using less water overall in these systems, which is a great thing. And not to disparage, the move and the shift of that, because we do need to save water and be conscientious about that. But there are also some consequences that come, right? So what do you see as being like a weed shift for the future if we continue on the path of more AWD or row rice?
I think when you look, I'm going back to some of the survey work, when we look at furrow irrigated rice, Palmer amaranth, Palmer pigweed comes right there, and it's second most problematic in furrow irrigated rice. And I'm seeing, alternate wetting and drying, I'm seeing more and more pigweed actually in those fields that's surviving the flood. We were laughing a few moments ago just about how that weed's evolving. And unfortunately today, I'm seeing more of it in flooded rice fields. And so I think that weed's going to continue to become an increasing issue of rice. And it wouldn't surprise me 5 years, 10 years from now if we don't look out across flooded rice fields and we don't see pigweed growing.
That's crazy. Yeah. But it could happen.
It's evolved resistance to all these herbicides. Yes. Why not evolve resistance to flooding?
Which is, flooding was the primary reason was as a herbicide, right?
Well,
because
absolutely.
It was a weed control
It's a
practice.
weed control tactic.
I wouldn't doubt the little boogers doing it because they're pretty smart, it seems like. So in talking about these weeds, what is some go-to or some ideas as far as a weed control program? And we'll just start with conventional rice to deal with these problematic weeds.
I think one thing is that we've got to start with a good sound burn down, have some residual in there. And, I always like to start with a clomazone product, make sure I've got a clomazone product there at planting. Is really going to help us out on the barnyard grass. Yes, we have barnyard grass that's resistant to clomazone today. We don't have a lot of it. I think now I'm still 12, 13 populations across the state. Folks continue to ask me, well, why do I not have a lot of clomazone resistance? And I think it's because we put things behind it to try to control those messes when it does escape control. But I really want to start there. You really have a lot of options, depending on whether I'm dealing with sedges, whether I'm going to deal with coffee bean. I like a gambit up front. If I've got nut sedge, I'm talking about yellow nut sedge there. If I have coffee bean up there, I'll take a gambit and put it there up front. If I've got grass I'm after, facet is a real good option. We do have a lot of facet resistance in this state, but I still get about 14 days of residual on facet-resistant barnyard grass. I don't see that from a post-emergent standpoint. So But from a pre, I will still see tremendous value associated with that. Once we get a rainfall, I think that we don't utilize enough Bolero, thiolbencarb. That's a herbicide that's going to help us out on these annual sedges that we were just talking about. It's a very good material for controlling barnyard grass. And so
I've seen that make a comeback. I've gotten several calls on Bolero tank mixes this year.
I have recommended a lot of Bolero this year. And so I agree with you. I think we are seeing more and more Bolero come back into the system. And so, and then you come back in about 1 to 2 leaf rice. It's all about putting out another residual, trying to basically build a barrier there. Prowl's a cheap herbicide. It's a herbicide that it does provide a tremendous amount of value, I think, for where it's positioned. It gives us a good bit of barnyard grass control. It can give us some pigweed control if we're in that row rise situation. So again, I like to see that in there. And then from there, I'm just going to kind of build a program based on what the weed spectrum looks like. I have folks ask me all the time, give me your standard weed control program. And I'm like, well, what weeds are we?
The only thing you could really do that on is barnyard grass, because it's in every field, but everything else
outside of that, I'm wanting to know what weeds are you actually dealing with, because then I can give you a program specific for those.